she's like, yes. And then what I like is she says, so what's your favorite scary movie? And so she walks over to the butcher block and she takes out a knife. She says, it's Halloween.
Right.
And he says, oh, is that the one with all the babies about the babysitters who gets stalked by the killer? And she's like, yeah. And then he's like going, oh, what else did she say? He say, then they go
Which is
into
like the guy in the white mask. That's like
white mask stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
then,
that's sort of.
so they kind of basically talk about the kind of three iconic horror films.
Yeah.
Slowly.
They
kind of
Freddy Krueger, Halloween,
and Friday the 13th.
Right.
But I like how it starts with Jason, or not Jason, with Michael Myers, and then she says, you know, the best line, and I think that scene where she says, you know, what? Well, I like the guy who, you know, freaks you out in your nightmares. You know, the one with the fingers. Oh, that's Freddy.
Right.
And he says, you know, the ones with the knives for hands. Oh, that's Freddy. And she says, yeah, that's one of my favorite ones. She said, yeah, the first one was good, but the rest of them sucked.
Right.
You know, and which is, you know, Wes Craven directed the first Nightmare on Elm Street.
Okay.
So I think it's a play on. It's kind of, you look at this film and it does kind of play on, you know, the kids that are hyped about these horror films, of 80s horror films, excuse me. I think that's sort of where it sort of comes in.
Right.
To, you know.
Yeah, and it's sort of. I don't know if this is the first movie. I'm sure there's other. You know, they sort of like they acknowledge other horror movies. It's not regular. You have like a zombie movie, and they're all like freaked out. What is this? And like they don't acknowledge.
Well, I think that this film is, you know, because I think, you know, these horror films like Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, all came out in the 80s, and these kids who grew up in the 80s are now teenagers in the 90s. This movie came out in 96. So, you know, they kind of grew up with these films. So, and what I like, it's kind of, so she sort of, but what I love is the line where he says, name the killer in Friday the 13th. And she says, it was Jason. And he's like, wrong answer. And he says, it was Jason. She says, it's Jason. I've seen that movie 3 goddamn times. And he says, well, if you've seen that movie so many times, you would know that it was Jason's mother who was the killer in Friday the 13th. Jason didn't show up till the sequel. And I was listening to the commentary by director Wes Craven, and he was talking about, you know, the thing about, you know, this, he knows his,
right.
He knows his
like
scary movie, you know, yeah. And so, and what I like, and I like how it just, the tensions builds, and like he says, she's like, and then she's like going, then she gets sort of like, after that she starts talking about, she gets really scared, you know, her fear starts building up,
right?
And she says, you know, she gets like, you know, she says, she remember at the beginning when he says, he's like, you know, do you have a boyfriend? He asked her if she has a boyfriend, and she says, no. Do you want to ask? Why? Do you want to ask me out? Right. Which never really says anything if it's a real boy. If, you know, she does have a boyfriend, and then she reveals where she says, when the tension grows higher and higher, she says, I do have a boyfriend. His name is Steve, not me, but they took my name. And he's gonna, you know, and he's big, he plays football, and he's gonna kick your ass. And he said, or no, she says, it's not like that. It's more of, my boyfriend plays football, he's big, and he'll kick your ass. And,
right.
And then the ghost face says, it wasn't Steve, is it? And she's like, turn on the patio lights. So the tension builds, right. And then you see him like taped to a chair. And he's like going, well, let's play. No,